So we don't really have a choice about relationships, do we? Because we're born into them. Of all the mammals on the planet, we are the most vulnerable, and we absolutely need other people from the beginning of life in order to survive. We just can't survive alone. We have family and work relationships. These are not a choice either. If you want to work, very few people actually work entirely on their own. If we want to achieve something that we can't do on our own, Susie wants to organize this conference, she has to talk to people, she has to relate to different people, there's no choice about it. We also want to be special to somebody, we want to have a connection, we need that, and that means relationships. Even people on the spectrum always say that they want to be with other people, so it's something innate in us that we need. This slide is trying to say, well, so why is it difficult? If we're born into relationships, and relationships are supposed to be so fundamental to us, then why are they difficult? But before I go any more, any of you, does anybody here in this group ever not have relationship challenges or problems at all, ever, where everything always went absolutely perfectly in all of your relationships? And don't worry about if it's not just personal. I deliberately don't want to talk about just romantic relationships. It's about every relationship. Anybody, show of hands, that never had anything at all go wrong? Well, okay, talk is finished, bye. So we're actually not particularly well made. How many of you know that we have 3 brains and not 1? Anybody? Okay. I can't go into all of them, and I can't go into a huge explanation because if I do all of that, then I'll miss out on talking about relationships. But I do want to mention that this has been known from the 1960s. It's called the Triune brain model. We have 3 brains. One of them is the reptilian brain. It's done here. Then we have a mammal brain right in the middle, and then we have this big brain. And the bit that's most important for relationships and for psychotherapy, which is what I do, is the prefrontal cortex. Now, a lot of the speakers today have mentioned bits and bobs about that, and some of it will kind of fit in with what I'm talking about. Each of our brains is designed to handle more complex stuff, and the idea is that they represent, inside our own head, we actually have almost like a timeline of evolution of life on this planet. So the most important brains that we need to look at for relationships are the limbic brain, the mammal brain, and the executive brain, the prefrontal cortex. If you draw 2 lines from the middle of your eyebrows upward, the bit in the front here, that's your prefrontal cortex. And that's actually the part of us that goes to therapy. People think they're coming to therapy or relationship or therapy or whatever because they have bad feelings or they're triggered or they've got problems. Actually, what we're there to do in therapy is to deal with this, but people don't know that. The mammal brain is very, very old. It's 200 million years old. It's very primitive. It's very old. It's responsible for the fight, flight, freeze responses that are ancient and that helped our species survive. And the purpose of, if the mammal brain had a purpose, if it had an agenda, it's the survival of the species. The mammal brain doesn't care if you're kind, if you're nice, if you're fulfilled, if you're happy or unhappy. All that it wants you to do is have babies, keep them alive as long as possible. You can then die. As long as you raise babies who can continue to exist and have more babies, the species is doing well, mammal brain's happy. So this is what we're kind of up against. We're up against a brain that doesn't actually care if we're happy or not, or if we're nice or not. The previous speaker, not the previous one, the one before, David, spoke about kindness. Mammal brain can be kind when it's happy, when it's relaxed, when it has what it needs. So it works in 2 modes, safe, unsafe. When we're safe, we can create, we groom, we can learn, we can invent. We can just relax and play and do. We think about documentaries you've seen about gorillas or about chimpanzees and how they are when they're kind of relaxed. This is what the mammal brain does. Emotions, which are the thing that bugs everybody. If it wasn't for emotions, I wouldn't have a job. So emotions are nothing mysterious and nothing gooey or strange. Emotions are simply the ancient language of the limbic brain and how it communicates information to us about what's going on. Are we safe or not safe? So I can't go into this in too much detail, but emotions are not something to be afraid of. They're just information. It's just that because it's so ancient, and all mammals feel, by the way, another reason not to eat them. Everything that's a mammal is feeling. So our mammal relatives of all types, of all species, all have feelings, but feelings are just information. That's all they are. There's nothing to be afraid of. And they communicate information that's important for our survival normally. Now, we're very sophisticated. We've kind of made our lives very, very complicated, and so our emotions have a lot of nuances as well. So there is stuff to know about them, but basically they are information. The mammal brain is a selfish brain in a sense that me, I have to survive, don't care about the rest of you lot. If me and a friend of mine are the two last people on the planet and there's one slice of bread left and everybody else is dead, and we're both limbic, we're going to fight over the slice of bread and we're going to kill each other, and one of us will take the slice of bread because we can live another 5 minutes. That is how stupid it is. It's very, very short-sighted. The thing that's really important to psychotherapy and to relationship is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is a bit of a mystery. Nobody understands how it's evolved because, and if you read any neuroscience books, they will tell you that they don't understand it. It doesn't fit the evolutionary timetable. And it has qualities in it which are called executive functions, which actually don't quite fit with the limbic brain at all. So that's why McLean in the 60s talked about different mentalities. So if your limbic brain says, me, I want to live as long as possible and death is the enemy, your prefrontal cortex says, I don't care actually how long I live, as long as I live well. The prefrontal cortex is really after purpose. Everything that people talked about today in terms of kindness, in terms of sharing, in terms of purpose and feeling like we want to make a difference in the world, all of that are automatic, natural executive functions that most of us have. There are people who have broken prefrontal cortex, but that's not the place to talk about that. But about 85% of us have fully functional executive functions. They don't need to be taught how to be kind. We have it already. So some of the qualities that you can see, bodily regulation, empathy, attunement, making others feel felt, emotional and behavioral regulation, fear extinction. We can actually directly go to the amygdala and tell ourselves that there's no tiger here, we don't need to be afraid. This is the part of our brain that does long-term planning, decision-making, objectivity. It's inclusive. It's the Buddhist in all of us. This is where Buddhism comes from. Have you ever seen do you see the picture of that lady, that lovely lady there? You know that the reason I have it is because it marks the center of the eyebrows. And you know how Buddhism and there's other religions too that mark that and think that's very, very important. How did these people know hundreds of years ago, before neuroscience, that there was something significant in the front? But they did, which is another mystery. The prefrontal cortex does not kick in most people until about age 15. So children, if all goes well, it's developing, but it's like the light switch doesn't turn on until you're about 15. And we get a full adult brain, proper adult brain, by the age of 25. The prefrontal cortex also gives us flexibility. It's able to make choices. The limbic brain goes fight, flight, freeze. I've got some threat. I don't know what to do. I can only choose this or that. The prefrontal cortex has the sky's the limit. We have options. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought, 1 minute you felt trapped. You thought, oh my God, I can't see a way out. I only have this and that. And then something shifted in you. And suddenly you thought, why didn't I think of that? That was an option too. Anybody? I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you. Exactly. That's because your prefrontal cortex kicked in. And you were able to suddenly think from a different part of you. It's a different brain. The prefrontal cortex also gives us consciousness, which is still a huge mystery. Nobody understands it. It gives us intuition. Always trust your intuition. It needs purpose and meaning. Life needs to mean something. And it gives us the ability to observe. So observing others, observing ourselves, standing back from what we're doing. And a lot of what people have spoken about today requires us to be able to observe. So what's happening to me? What am I feeling? What am I doing? That comes from here. That's an executive function from the prefrontal cortex. We also aren't afraid. The prefrontal cortex has no fear at all. None. Isn't that amazing? And we all have it. Think about it. It also gives us morality and ethics. It gives us the understanding and caring about how we impact on other people, the consequences of our actions. People who have that broken are actually psychopathic because they don't care. They don't care about how they impact on others. I hope not many of you have had the misfortune of having a relationship with somebody who's psychopathic, but I'm kind of hinting to the future of this talk, just a little bit into a few more minutes. Being in a relationship with somebody who has a broken prefrontal cortex is deadly, deadly to your psychology. So what goes on in relationships? Well, basically, the reason we have problems, mental health problems, the reason I have a job, the reason we have problems in relationships is because we're not actually that well made. So, okay, we've got these two brains, but because one is 200 million years old, and this is barely 2 million, and nobody understands how it's got there, these two brains, that's a big discovery, actually, only from the last 15 years. I've been in practice 20. We learned nothing about this in my therapy school. These two brains are not connected particularly well. And so the idea is that when the limbic brain, when we are under threat, when we feel under threat, we see a threat, we experience it, the limbic brain has the capacity to shut down all of these functions temporarily. In healthy people who are non-psychopathic and all of this is working, the shutdown will be temporary until you feel a bit better, until we feel a bit more relaxed and we've recovered from the threat, and this is coming back. Have you ever been having this feeling of flip-flopping? One minute you're an adult at work and everything is great, then you come home and your husband or wife or the kids or somebody's there and you get triggered. And you think, well, I was just this great person at work and everybody's listening to me and I'm all this mature person and I gave a talk and I had a wonderful presentation and then I'm at home and I'm reduced to a puddle. I'm a 5-year-old, I don't make any sense. Anybody? Anybody not have that? So we flip-flop because the brains are not integrated enough. Now, it's not anybody's fault. This is how we are at this current state of evolution. Good news is you've heard the word neuroplasticity today, throughout the day. That means the capacity of the brain to change its architecture. So that means neurons can connect with other neurons. If it wasn't the case, we wouldn't be able to learn anything. All learning, it depends on neurons connecting and forming neural networks. And the same applies to what we think of as mental health. In order for people to be well, we need to integrate these two brains better than they are. Therefore, there are no shortcuts to mental health or to well-being. Without integrating these brains better, we're never going to be reliable because we're always, every time we're under threat, it can be mild, we're going to lose it temporarily, and then we'll come back to it. And this flip-flopping is horrible. Somebody mentioned earlier today this sort of cyclical nature of things. You do something, yeah, I'm going to exercise, yeah, I'm going to eat well, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then it drops. That's because what you're trying to do is beat your limbic brain into shape instead of having the prefrontal cortex in charge. Prefrontal cortex is called the executive brain for a reason. It is supposed to be in charge of everything. If you want to have good relationships, if you want to have a healthy life, that has to be in charge. When the brains are integrated, and we know that for a fact, when they're better integrated, one of the indications that you see straight away is that recovery time from triggers shrinks very quickly. So if you had a trigger, I don't know, some particular familiar trigger, every time you see your mother-in-law or your mother or some neighbor or somebody at work and you get really triggered, when you start to get better integrated, your recovery time shrinks dramatically. If something used to take a month or 3 months, you're reduced to a week, from a week to a day, from a day to an hour. And that's one of the things that I asked my clients to monitor about themselves, and everybody can do that. You can actually assess yourself. We also get better mental and physical health. The more integrated we are, the more we feel in control of our lives without forcing ourselves to be in control, and not the bad kind of control, but the more we feel in charge. So how do we integrate? Emotions are the key. Emotions are not a problem in anybody. Every person sitting here and almost everybody alive, their limbic brain is working at full capacity and doing exactly what it was intended to do. Except it's not meant to be in charge of an adult life. Yeah, we need this in charge. So One of the ways, or the key way to actually start integrating ourselves, and they know this because they've done scans on brains of children, they looked at different styles of attachment and how children are handled, what it does to their brain. And so we know that whenever you validate your own emotions and the emotions of a child, for example, you create integrative fibers between the two brains. So the key to integrating your brains is actually to validate your own emotions. Every time you feel something, you need to say, it's okay to feel like this. And you do it from here. So inner child work, any of you that knows about this, it used to be, it's true. Inner child work is absolutely true, except they never explain to people that they're supposed to do the parenting of the inner child, if you like, from this bit of the brain. And when I started in psychotherapy, I would do what I was taught to do, and then the clients would come back and would say, well, I really tried what you said, what you did, what you told me to do, but I felt irritable and I just couldn't be bothered with the sniveling little shit, And so I thought, something's not right here. What's going on? And then, of course, when the neuroscience came in, the penny dropped and all the dots can be joined. Of course, you cannot parent or reparent the limbic brain from the limbic brain. That's what we've all had to do anyway. Most of us had human parents, most of us? Yeah, anybody an alien here? Most of us had human parents who have probably done the best they could with what they knew. And we are where we are. So parents who don't know this can't teach that. What goes wrong in relationships? And why can they be so problematic? The main thing that goes wrong in relationships, and I'm sounding very confident because I am, I'm a relationship therapist, and I've been working with this for 20 years. I've had 2 marriages that I left, and I'm in a wonderful relationship now that's been for 4.5 years. So I have experience with relationships, intimate relationships, but I've also got all kinds of relationships. The problem with us in relationships is when both people in the situation that they're in have triggers to their limbic brain. So you're trying to sort something out, but you're trying to do it from the limbic brain. But no, you said this. But no, you said that. But no, that's not true. But the other day, that's hopeless. So when both people in any relationship have a problem and it's sticky and they can't sort it out, it's because they're both in their limbic brain. If we want to sort something out, if one of the 2 people, one of them could be here, untriggered, we're good. Because as soon as one is here, they're able to validate, they're able to be with the other person without all the emotional triggers and just be there. Think up here, we're all Dalai Lama. You don't need to learn this. That's the amazing thing. If you get reliable access to it, we're all like that. So imagine that somebody's triggered. You need to think of it, if somebody's triggered, no matter how annoying and how much it pisses you off or it hurts, that person is suffering. But the only way you can care about their suffering is if you are in your prefrontal cortex and have all these wonderful executive functions that you have. So why do we have triggers in the limbic brain? Well, we have a history. We all have a past. Things happen to us. Our parents and the people we were raised with did not necessarily know how to validate us when things were happening. So a little boy comes back from school and says to mom, "Nobody played with me at school today. I have no friends." So what's the right response? "Oh, don't be silly. You've got friends. Of course you've got friends." This is not a bad mother I'm talking about. This is a mother who's very loving. Wouldn't harm this child in any stretch of the imagination. She loves her child. But don't be silly. She's trying to make him feel better, right? But what actually happens to that child? We say, "Nobody played with me at school today." We don't even know what the child's feeling. We can only imagine. This is a 7-year-old. This is a true story. So what do you think the child's feeling when the mum says, "Of course you've got friends. You've got Kevin and you've got John." And what's wrong with that? So at that moment, that poor child, right, he doesn't know. His limbic brain is 200 million years old. He's afraid. The kids didn't play with him. He therefore thinks he's going to die. Every uncomfortable feeling that a child feels, they think they're going to die. They don't know how to discriminate between what's really dangerous and what's not dangerous. Children need adults' brains to help them grow up. Since none of us, or most of us, didn't really have that kind of skill available in our environment, there were key events in our development. And there might not even be anything you remember consciously, but there would be key events that were not integrated properly inside our brain. In order for that child to do well, and for that not to become some kind of a trauma that he will come to therapy with me at age 40, mom needs to say to him, anybody wants to venture a guess what mom needs to say to him? Validate? Exactly. So that shows empathy. You can say, do you know, whatever you're feeling, it's okay to feel like this. You're probably feeling, and then if the child is small, you offer them words for feelings. You say, oh, you're probably feeling a bit disappointed. Maybe you're feeling a bit angry. Maybe you feel a bit lonely. You try to offer them words. The child will tell you. The child will say, yeah, I'm feeling like this, feeling like that. It's all right. I'm here. And everything will be okay. The child needs to know that just because they're feeling bad because their friends didn't play with them, they're not actually going to die. And somebody's got their back. The parent needs to be in their prefrontal cortex, not in the limbic brain where they want to make the child not feel bad. The child already feels bad. You can't make them not feel bad. So every time the parent validates, they create integration inside the child's brains. That child grows to become more resilient. You heard the word resilience today, right? The more integrated we are, the more resilient we are. The more integrated we are, the happier we are. The more integrated we are, the more physically well we are. And none of us had that. So every little incident when you were growing up or when you were living as throughout your life, whenever people did not validate you, those experiences became quarantined in your right brain, in your limbic right brain, and stayed there. All it takes is somebody to press on the right toe and bump, and off you go. And that's a trigger. Now, it doesn't mean you have had, I have a booklet there on trauma, and some people will have trauma. About 50% of people actually have trauma and they don't even know it. I'm not talking about full-on trauma. I'm not talking about full-on post-traumatic stress and child abuse and rape and things that are absolutely horrible that happen to people. I'm talking about growing up in a reasonably okay family, except every time the child felt something, people tried to make them feel better. They gave them a cake. They distracted them. All of these events are going to stay there. Then later on in life, in relationships, these are going to be triggered because they're landmines. They're sitting there. Does that make sense to everybody? Or am I completely weird? And okay, so if it feels overwhelming, if what you're feeling is overwhelming, the clue is, and like I said, you can have those slides, so don't panic, don't rush to write or anything like that. If what you're feeling in a situation with somebody else feels overwhelming, you've had a talk with your boss at work and you feel like you're a total mess at the end of it, it's not just I'm mildly irritated or I'm mildly sad. It's I'm feeling absolutely horrible. It's likely to be 90% in the past and only 10 in the present. And trust me, that is true. So if it's in the past 90%, that means it's a result of some old circuitry that started to fire, and when it fired, you're actually feeling exactly what you felt when those neurons were wired way, way, way back whenever in your history. And it's not just childhood. We have events, things that happen to us throughout our lives. Limbic love is attachment. Anybody heard the word attachment? Yeah. So attachment is what we feel towards the people who keep us alive. We depend on them. I will love you if you help me survive and live and be okay. Prefrontal cortex love is very mature love. It's that sort of mature love that sort of Buddhist kind of sense. I'm connected to everything. Everybody matters. Nobody matters less than everybody else. I come from Israel originally, if you wondered about my accent, and I'm a pro-Palestinian activist. I actually renounced my Israeli citizenship in 2001, and I'm an activist for Palestinian rights. Because when I grew up in my culture, basically, you're only stuck with your own people, and everybody else didn't matter. Now, I don't feel that way. I think I'm a member of the species, and I'm a member of society, and I care about everybody, and that comes from here. When we're limbic, we care more about ourselves, our small family, and the group that we are connected to that are helping us to survive. Attachment is not a bad thing. It's part of what we are. My business name is Fully Human because I think we need to accept the fullness of what we are in order to be well, not reject bits of us and say, oh, I shouldn't feel hatred or I shouldn't feel anger. Oh, bloody hell I do. If I feel angry, I feel angry. If I feel hatred, I feel hatred. necessarily act out of it. And if I'm reasonably well integrated, I will choose my actions from here. But all our feelings are okay. Nobody has a defective limbic brain, would you believe? So in relationships, so nature just wants us to survive, but we have more than that. So people cannot be well, and we've known this from the days of Carl Rogers, 1940s, when he invented humanistic psychology. We cannot do well if we're just mammals who just survive. From the moment that appears, that was all gone. That was the leaving the Garden of Eden. Now we suddenly know that we're suffering. We know what we are. We cannot be well if all we do is survive, cope. We need more. We need to fulfill our purpose. The only way we can do that is if we're better integrated. So if we are just limbic, if we're just mammal, we feel anxious. Anxiety is a sign that we're simply not particularly well integrated. That's all it is. There's nothing to worry about. It's actually a wake-up call for us that we could do something with that. Toxic relationships, and they don't have to be just in personal or romantic relationships. They can be with anybody. A toxic relationship is fundamentally a relationship with somebody whose prefrontal cortex is permanently damaged. I'm not talking about this sort of odd trigger that we can recover from, because we've all been there. We've all said the wrong thing in a conversation and then gone back and said, look, I'm really sorry. I was really tired and I was triggered and I was in a bad way and I'm so sorry I said that to you. You don't deserve that. That's okay. That's not toxic. What's toxic is the relationships where you can never sort anything out. The other person can never see your point of view. They can never do role reversal, which is what we call it in psychodrama, where you're here and you're able to see, oh my God, so this is what it looks like from your perspective. So when I said that to you, that's how it felt. Relationships like that are dangerous, are very, very harmful to us. And there's always an imbalance of power in them as well. In relationships like that, there is a tendency for one side to want more power because they're very limbic. They're not here, so they can't share. Here we share. Here we don't want to be the leader. We don't want to be more powerful. We want to share with everybody. Somebody who's permanently damaged there can't do that. So that's dangerous. Your limbic brain is not your enemy. Your emotions are not the enemy. If they're there, they have a bloody good reason to be there. So validate them, and you'll find that it's much easier in relationships. Now, obviously, you can't fix the world in 40 minutes or 45, however long I've been talking, but that's the start.